Welcome to EIR Live, where we dive into the lives and lessons of entrepreneurs in residence. I'm Ilya Tabakh, together with my co-host Terrance, ready to bring you closer to the heartbeat of the innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. Every episode, we explore the real stories behind the ideas, successes, setbacks, and everything in between. For everyone from aspiring EIRs to seasoned pros, EIR Live is your gateway to the depth of the entrepreneurial journey and bringing innovative insights into the broader world. Check out the full details in the episode description, subscribe to stay updated, and join us as we uncover what it takes to transform visions into ventures. Welcome aboard. Let's grow together. All right, so I'm super excited to be here with you, Terrance, because this has been sort of coming for a while. But what's exciting is, in this first episode, or episode 0, as we're calling it, it's really interesting for me to talk about how we got here, and for the reason that two of us are on the screen here today was I've been reaching out to EIRs. What's crazy is for years now, I've been talking to some folks recently, and I sort of retell the story, and I'm like, I started at like the end of 2020, early 2021, and then I stopped for a sec. I'm like, man, it's 2024. I'm like, it's been years since I've been talking to people. And what's funny is normally when I talk to people, I'm one of the first EIRs that they talk to. A common reaction is like, oh man, that's awesome. I wanted to see what other people are doing, but I've never reached out. Or they're like, hey, I have an awesome group of EIRs in my company. We're pretty close. Or, we have a great group of EIRs at the university and really good exchange, but people don't really reach out beyond sort of that kind of gate, that fence, for whatever reason, and what's great is you actually reached out to me, right. And through some kind of force in the universe, I get this, awesome message that popped up in my inbox, and you're like, hey man, you're doing some cool things. I love the EIR thing. Let's talk. And I'm like, man, that has not happened to me.
That's right. That's
and
right.
So that's like a super meta game. And so it's super awesome that, we were able to connect. And then, also just in that conversation, kind of our original conversations, we were both pretty excited about, that kind of connecting the network and building those bridges. And so I think that's a pretty cool origin story for, kind of a conversation or a set of conversations. So, and as we were kicking around, and ultimately decided to do a podcast, we decided to call it EIR Live. What's your take on that? Why do you think that's a good kind of name for what we're going for here?
I mean, honestly, EIRs, we live in that moment, right? We get things done sort of on the fly. And I think having a dialogue and a conversation with EIRs live, right, I think sort of was a natural step for the name to get here. And because we plan on hosting these conversations to share insights with people from different walks of life, from different residents, which Ilya will talk about later on, and different actual aspects of how do you actually do this, and talking about it live. There's a live aspect to this versus just a recorded aspect of it, to like most other podcasts. We wanted to engage our audience and the people who are going to be engaging with the podcast. So, that's what I believe. Do you have another definition?
No, I think that's great. I think I like the live part because I really do want it to be more interactive. And in a lot of these conversations with EIRs, they're really excited about kind of connecting with other folks. I'm hoping that part of the live piece can be, kind of including that audience, really having them be part of the conversation before the show. And I think over time, we'll evolve it, and we can build some mechanisms into where they can be involved during potentially the recording of the show, but definitely after we do the episode, also kind of join on a live session afterwards. Right. And so we have some ideas today on how to make it live, but what's cool is I think we can kind of continue to extend and then think about how else we can add to that live experience. And so we have some ideas, but I'm excited to, part of the interesting thing about a conversation is people get to sort of add and contribute to that. So I'm excited to see how it develops over time.
Absolutely.
And I think, it sort of builds a little bit on the goals of the podcast as well. I think part of it, even in the name, it's kind of connecting people and creating a forum, a platform, a live conversation. What are
Right.
some of the other goals you're thinking about, kind of, or hoping that we'll be able to achieve in some of these conversations?
For me, it's all about ecosystem building, right? How do you add value to an ecosystem of EIRs who probably do not know each other today, but who need to know each other, who are experiencing a problem that another EIR is sort of experiencing right now, but they haven't encountered yet? How do you avoid those landmines? I'm hoping that when we build this ecosystem of, EIR-led companies or ventures or the things that they're working on in their residence, that people have a community now that they can go to that, in my mind, doesn't exist today in a tangible way.
Yeah, that's awesome. For me, I think as we've been kind of preparing for some of the episodes, I think really the getting in the weeds with the folks that were there and really capturing their insights and
Right.
maybe even capturing a little bit of the background and kind of what were they thinking, what were they feeling, a lot of these things are pretty transferable. In some ways, talking to other EIRs is almost like a counseling session.
There we go.
The experiences are very similar. They can kind of relate to similar stories, some of the struggles, things like that. So I think for me, that's kind of, at least off the bat, the exciting part, connecting with folks that are doing it, in some cases that maybe have expanded the role and really capturing that.
That's right.
Yeah, and a lot of other kind of things as well. I think one of the fun things that I've been asking recently, and it was kind of Terrance's idea, but asking EIRs kind of what's their dream EIR role, right?
Right.
As we've been kind of continuing to dialogue on this topic, it's sort of expanded my thinking a little bit, and also talking to other people, just seeing what they get excited about. And so this idea of kind of manifesting, helping folks find the places that they want to end up. Having a career as an EIR isn't necessarily a thing for everybody, but there's definitely folks that have had, multiple and continue to have EIR roles. Terrance is one of them, and so maybe it's helpful to jump into your background, Terrance, and really dig in and give folks a little bit of an idea why you're so excited about this topic.
I'm really excited about this topic, and I think very few people that you meet in the world, like the origin story that Ilya shared earlier, have the same passion about this topic as me. Because I think, like most EIRs in the world, when they first got their first opportunity, they had no clue what the role was, or they never even heard of the thing, right? And they had to go figure out, what is an EIR? They started going to their good friend Google, right, to figure out what is this role and this mysterious title, right? But my background didn't start in this place. It started in the world of corporate America, working for a company called EMC. Had a few roles before that, but at the formative part of my career, I worked for a data storage IT infrastructure company called EMC, where we built data storage products and solutions, but not just data storage products and solutions, right? Obviously software, security, services, things that actually make those solutions function in the marketplace. And usually when people refer to the cloud, technically it's going to end up on some piece of hardware somewhere in somebody's data center. And for me, before I started working in that field, I actually wasn't that experienced in that space, right? But that's sort of where I cut my teeth and got my background and my infrastructure to what I do today, working at that company. And I've done everything in that company, from product to business development to strategy and ops to building new ventures, all the way up until, the company got acquired by Dell. And now the second largest acquisition in technology history for $67 billion. I think the largest one today is now Activation Blizzard, I believe, and another transaction that went through. So I went through that whole sort of, transition and, became a part of Dell EMC, the new combined entity. And in that capacity, I was doing strategy and new ventures, and helping take new programs and projects and initiatives from 0 to 1, bringing these two massive companies together. And that was super interesting work for me, but it's what sparked, that, alongside a few other things, sparked my interest in, the world of entrepreneurship, startups, and venture capital. And that interest sort of led me to, leave the company not long after, maybe a year or two later, to go on to study law of all things, because I had a background in business, had a background in information systems, and this legal piece will help round out my background in a 360 point of view. But I wanted to not go to law school to become a lawyer, right? Or to practice law per se. I actually wanted to be an investor. So long story short, I went off to law school. I studied venture capital law and entrepreneurship, a program designed specifically for STEM professionals. I had the privilege to get into Northwestern Law School, so I moved to Chicago, and really from that point on, I started to cut my teeth in the world of entrepreneurship. Started mentoring founders at some of the world's largest and most renowned accelerators and incubator programs. Tried my hand at my first startup, which failed, by the way, which was focused on DVT, deep vein thrombosis, which is essentially blood clots, right? There's really no effective way for physicians to monitor their patients post-care in real time for those who have DVT, right? And trying to find a solution to how do you actually do that? I learned a lot along the way, failed miserably, but that's okay, because one of the things that you'll see as a thread in a lot of EIRs that we've done a lot of different things and we've failed a lot, but we've also had a lot of successes along the way. And over time, you build a skill of taking things from 0 to 1 in a very effective way. And doing those things sort of after those failures, landed an opportunity at Techstars, helping a portfolio of 10 startups do business development and growth. Shout out to my good friend, Neil Sales, who took a shot on me at the time and saw something in me and the potential. There's also a piece of that maps back to the role of the EIR. But I left Techstars and started to work for a family office and startup studio of an NBA player. Started to cut my teeth in the world of sports tech and gaming and esports and other things that surrounded that ecosystem. While I was doing the opportunity at Techstars, I started to start my second venture, focused on the world of supply chain and logistics. And that's what ended up getting me folded into SAP and me landing my first mysterious role as an entrepreneur in residence, right? But I had to give you that long winding path to sort of how did I get the opportunity? Because it was a mix of, working at an accelerator, having a few failures, going out in the ecosystem, having some experience already in infrastructure under me, right, from my previous corporate career that led me to my first opportunity in Silicon Valley to be an EIR for SAP, multi-billion-dollar software company in their studio called SAP.io. And in that studio, I was responsible for incubating solutions, enterprise software pains and solutions. From SAP, I went on to my next EIR role, which is at a company called Mach49, which is a venture builder that partners with the world's largest corporations to spin out new venture capital firms and new ventures from scratch. And I became an EIR there, partnering with our corporate partners to help them build new ventures in construction and healthcare, in food ingredients, a lot of different things under the spectrum. But my role at Mach49 was very different from my role at SAP. Then I went on to do some more work supporting a growth stage company as an entrepreneur in residence. So I've done this called One Day. So I've done this so many different times as an entrepreneur in residence, and every single time my residence was different and the work that I did was different. So I won't bore the audience, but that's my background and journey to being an EIR. And along the way, I became a venture partner, a scout, an advisor to multiple venture capital firms and startup studios. But I want to pass it back to Ilya to talk about his background, because he's equally as impressive in this space. So Ilya, talk to the people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And before I jump into that, I believe EIRs really are translators. And what's cool is, every time we talk about backgrounds, there's always like a new layer to the onion, right? But I think it's really important to sort of have a collection of languages, right? Because if you're going to translate, it's not just the words, it's kind of the cultural understanding, sort of the expectations in the market. And as you were sort of walking through your background, first of all, kind of funny because there's a couple more similarities I picked up on this time than last time. And I'm sure next time we'll talk about it same. But the other thing, that kind of struck me was the operations background, the business, the legal, the building piece. There's a lot of kind of complementary, but also different perspectives there. And I think to your point about it's important to fail and you learn a lot through that. I think it's also important to sort of have the viewpoint and be able to bring a little bit of that perspective from all these disparate markets, roles, things like that. I think that really kind of steps you up. And it's funny because in my background there's a lot of that too. And so when you look at, I just like most of the rest of the EIRs that I talk to think I'm a little weird, right? A lot of those conversations start with, I'm probably different than other EIRs you talk to, but right. And so I've sort of embraced that having a non-traditional, weird, maybe not clear line career path is actually a feature, not a bug. And so for me, that's kind of how it's turned out. I'm right now pretty much on the third chapter of my professional career. The first chapter was mostly academic and research. So I was got a couple degrees in computer engineering and was working on my PhD in environmental engineering at the University of Kansas when I got a pretty awesome opportunity to help stand up a university-wide transportation research institute. And what was amazing about that is the gentleman that came in to run it had spent 30 years running the transportation program at Oak Ridge National Lab. And so he was sort of, on his second or third career at that point, and came to the University of Kansas to try to grow this program. And his approach was really to be kind of expansive and inclusive in looking at different disciplines, bringing in perspectives from the, kind of administrative federal side, from the academic side, from industry, and really creating a conversation and a really interesting ecosystem where there really wasn't one before. Yeah. And so in that, I got to help build a biofuel, sort of algae to biofuel program. Did a lot of work in first kind of waste oil to biodiesel, and then played around a little bit with inductive charging of transit buses. Now, keep in mind, this is like the late 2000s, early 2010s. So
early days.
Probably, yeah, climate, or not even climate. It was clean tech 1.0 or 2.0, depending who you listen to. But that was pretty awesome. Also, I was a NSF fellow and, did some things in kind of interdisciplinary development for looking at how do you develop biomedical products, did some of the I-Core curriculum. So I was really lucky in some ways that the academic establishment realized that, hey, we need our folks that are going to be faculty members to be able to communicate properly, to be able to think about how do some of these inventions and IP get commercialized. And so I got a lot of exposure pretty early in my education and really in kind of building that first chapter. Ultimately, I ended up taking a leave of absence for my PhD to do a program with the Kauffman Foundation. And that program was initially designed to teach, funny enough, British PhDs how to commercialize technology. Fortunately, by the time I got into the Kauffman Global Scholars Program, it had been opened up beyond British PhDs because I'm clearly not British. But it was awesome because it was a combination of kind of an EMBA in entrepreneurship, if such a thing exists. Okay. And so some really good curriculum and the latest thinking. And, a lot of it I'd seen in pieces, but it was great to kind of see it as more of a complete thought. Yeah. Then the second part of the program was going to some of the stronger entrepreneurial ecosystems in the US and really interacting with some of the kind of key structural pieces of each one of those ecosystems. So we went to kind of the Boston ecosystem, Chicago, Silicon Valley, and got to sit down with some of the folks that really were structurally crucial to each one of those. And it was really interesting to see, companies integrating M&A transactions and thinking about how do you kind of create a big forum, for example, in Cambridge, the Cambridge Innovation Center and kind of that whole area was sort of the a place where folks started first connecting, and then there's all kinds of crazy stories that happened afterwards. And so that was a really important perspective, and because I got to see sort of all these places next to each other, it was great to start to see how are they different, how are they similar, what is an ecosystem, right? Everybody uses the word ecosystem. But it's really interesting to think about stakeholders. Why do they show up? Why is it good? Who is it good for? And so I got to see a lot of that. And then ultimately, the third part of the program was to create an opportunity for the fellow to kind of get an experience to expand their capabilities. And for me, that was the first time I ended up being in residence. I was the Kauffman Global Scholar in residence at Cisco. And so I was sitting in Cisco Systems, like the network company. I was sitting in their intellectual property group. And that was pretty important to me because I was interested in seeing how large tech organizations use intellectual property to go to market and kind of maintain proprietary advantage. And what was cool about Cisco is at the time they had issued their 10,000th patent, and they were also completing or kind of executing their 185th M&A transaction in the history of the company. And so it was really interesting to sort of see, how do you kind of reason about creating value? How do you ultimately kind of think about IP? What is prior art, right? A lot of the time people have patents. At the end of the day, patents are like a whole different animal. And so it was really interesting for, somebody that spent most of their time in kind of research academic settings to really think about that in more of an industrial way. That ultimately ended up being kind of an off-ramp from my chapter one. After that, I was, became an entrepreneur in the wild, as I say. And so started doing startups. I did a few different startups in kind of related fields. I did one on human reaction, so capturing kind of facial expressions and things like that from video. The second one I did was kind of taking some of those insights into sports analytics. We actually ended up building the first sports app powered by IBM Watson. So that was kind of a crazy time. Ultimately, that was also the year where FanDuel and DraftKings put $250 million into advertising to change the fantasy football market from sort of the traditional to daily. So that was kind of a crazy time. We ultimately ended up pivoting a few times, try to do some athlete health stuff. And that's learned a lot about kind of the healthcare system at that point. And then ultimately, the most recent startup I did was we built a distributed data center in the Midwest that had about 40,000 CPU cores. So pretty significant data center infrastructure. And that got me super excited about, what does infrastructure look like if it's kind of meshed and connected and all that stuff. And so as we were bringing that startup in for landing, I started to support a little bit of innovation work over at Black & Veatch, which is a large global engineering procurement construction company, and got to know their innovation team, got to know the company. It actually turns out, I'm convinced that the world is a small village, but definitely the Midwest of the U.S. is a small village. And it turned out that my graduate advisor was actually the NT Veatch chaired professor of civil environmental architectural engineering at the University of Kansas. And NT Veatch was one of the founders of Black & Veatch. So it never sort of occurred to me that, I had kind of a lot of exposure, but I got to learn what they were working on. They got to learn about sort of what I was good at. And ultimately I became kind of the first, what I call corporate horizontal entrepreneur in residence. I'll jump into some of what that means a little bit later. But that got me to kind of chapter 3, where I'm at today, is thinking about how can you bring in some of that perspective and some of my past experience into this entrepreneur in residence role. And I, jokingly call it the entrepreneur in captivity chapter of my career. But, it's just very different than being in the wild and doing your own thing. And I think kind of knowing what that difference is and thinking about what you need to be successful is pretty important. But, backgrounds are really fun, and sort of diving in, because you can start to kind of take some of those modifiers and really talk about, hey, in this other world, this is different and things like that. And so I think, having kind of that background and that perspective has actually been helpful in talking to other EIRs and starting to sort of think about them and kind of codify them and things like that. And so, I think it's important when you say EIR, there's a lot of ways that term gets used. There is the kind of academic. So I found it helpful to add essentially 2 modifiers. One is, what's the residence, and 2, what's kind of the function, right? And I like to describe the function as either horizontal or vertical. And to me, vertical is if you're brought in to run a business line internally or potentially spin one out. And then horizontal is if you're there to work on the kind of innovation capacity of the organization. Are you there to help them think about what skills the team needs and how to kind of build muscle to do it, or potentially connect with the outside world as well. I see sort of EIRs as being at the interface of the outside world and inside the company. And so most of the time, even when I'm talking about functions, I'm saying there's a role that you can play inside, but there's also a role that you can play outside. And I think it's important to keep an eye on both. And yeah, what I found is that by looking at what's the residence and then what's the functional role, and realistically, by the way, I say everybody's diagonal. Nobody's like completely vertical or horizontal. In some cases, there's people that are very, very focused on running their business line, but they're still having to kind of communicate and align across a broader standpoint. And there you can't be completely vertical because otherwise you're going to get orphaned. But once you sort of have those two modifiers figured out, you can sort of really start to understand how folks are similar. And what's cool is this EIR concept is being spread to many more residences. So, I've talked to folks that have been in EIR in kind of a federal defense context. I've talked to folks that are EIRs at some of the bigger corporates. And, this whole idea of a corporate EIR is relatively new. And then ultimately, even nonprofits and kind of public entities are starting to get this kind of role. And so it's going to be exciting in these conversations to really dive in and think about what kind of roles and continue to expand. And hopefully, our audience, you guys, the listeners, will work with us to continue to sort of peel back that onion and discover other people that's out there. Terrance, you obviously have a lot of insight and background here too. Would love to sort of hear about your thoughts on kind of the role of an entrepreneur in residence and kind of what they do in an organization.
No, absolutely. And, you did something that I was about to do, because I think we've been in EIR land for so long that I think we've been using the term EIR, in the podcast, but we never introduced it as entrepreneur in residence per se. But that term could also mean executive in residence, right? As I start to think about the role of an EIR, depending on what your E or your X is at the beginning of that term, right? Entrepreneur, executive in residence. You can be an operator in residence, which we will extend this opportunity to on the podcast. You can also sort of be an investor in residence. There's multiple different types of residents, or multiple different types of names, like a founder in residence, right? Some of them are slightly different roles, but that in residence piece is very consistent, right? And the role of an EIR will differ depending on what your residence, will be, right? What organization are you going to support? And usually I've seen that they all have some sort of organization to go to, right? It's a question I get often, which is, is there a role of an EIR at all types of organizations? Sure. The organization could be a venture capital firm. It could be a museum. It could be an association. It could be a nonprofit, right? It could be an academic institution, as Ilya described earlier. But your role will differ depending on what your residence is. As he started to, dive into, there's many different types of residences that you can actually go into, right? So my role as an EIR, if I'm in residence as a university, might be to mentor students and help them with their startups, right? My role as an EIR at a museum might be to help them digitize things that used to be, physical for people, right? To bring more digital, initiatives into the museum, right? Which is what I'm reading and seeing about another EIR currently, right? That you could be an EIR for a corporation, right? Where you're helping them actually spin up brand new, net new ventures that will be a brand new business line, or it's going to be a brand new venture, completely a company that they're going to spin out separately and have its own separate cap table, its own separate investors. I've seen entrepreneurs in residence, do this role in a nonprofit, right? Like United Way. Actually, they have multiple EIRs at United Way and multiple other nonprofits as well. So we're seeing this role, be used in a different residence because people see the value of it, right? So what exactly is the baseline sort of foundational things you need to do as an EIR, and what are you actually doing on a day-to-day, right? Being an EIR and being in that role is really an opportunity for you to connect dots, right? Not only for the broader organization, but for the outside world, right? Because the outside world doesn't know what the organization is doing and what they care about. And as an EIR, your job is to be a translator, right? Your job is to be bilingual in the world of startups and whatever else you're focused on in the ecosystem. And I think understanding that, you being bilingual and being fluent in the languages that you speak or the things that you're translating, and you're usually translating experiences into your residence context, right? That I started to give examples of earlier. You bring an outside-in perspective. I get to bring in perspectives from working at an IT infrastructure company, right? That supported multiple industries. I get to bring in the expertise from the world of sports, from the world of gaming, right? From the world of entertainment and fitness, from the world of food, from the world of construction, right? When you bring in all of these different perspectives and you apply it to a new residence or a new context, right? That is a superpower, right? Of an entrepreneur in residence, right? For them to be able to translate that experience into value, tangible value, right? That organizations can actually leverage and use. But that's not it. I think that my most favorite thing about working with an early stage team, if I'm doing it in a corporate environment or a team of students, which is going to be our next generation of leaders trying to build their businesses, that I get to transform the hearts and minds of people. I get to transform the culture of whatever my residence is at the time, right? How do you take the library from being physical and manual and doing things not as effectively as they could have done to being more efficient and see people reap the benefits of that, right? How do you see these things inside of a corporation or a mothership or whatever that enterprise might be and see people change, right? You see people leave sometime and go spin out their own companies and raise a lot of capital. You had a piece of influence of doing that, from changing their hearts and minds of taking risk, but tangible risk that you think you can add value to in an organization. So when I think about the role of an EIR, it's highly dependent on the residents, but using those as examples that I just described as some of the ways that people can actually perform the role of an EIR, right?
We're going to have to jump into that one. I love like a lot of the meat and potatoes of,
absolutely,
sort of inspiring and changing hearts and minds is where sort of successful and not successful roles, there's just so much texture there that as soon as you said sort of transform hearts and minds, seeing people do stuff, I've seen definitely a lot of those things. I've also seen some counterexamples where, generally folks know what they know. They don't know what they don't know. And it's a lot easier to be comfortable in the things that you've built your career on. So we'll table that for now, but I love this. This is one of my favorite topics on really thinking about how do you take the individual, partner them with the residents in a way that's sort of strategically impactful, meaningful, and then kind of help everybody reskill and really collaborate and work together well.
Absolutely.
So we'll be talking about this more. Anyway, I didn't want to interrupt you there, but you got me pretty excited about that topic.
100%. I mean, because when it's all said and done, right? Ideas don't build companies only, right? We can work 80 hours a day, but we need people. We need actual human capital to build new companies, new ventures, new value, right? And then we can automate, we can start to streamline, and then we can repurpose the value of those people to do other new things and innovative things. So I think there's a unique opportunity, and probably my favorite part of being some people call me a serial EIR, right? Sort of doing this sort of work is because depending on my residents, I get to deploy empathy and impact that scale in a very different way. And I think, as you think about that and what we're looking to accomplish in the near term, for EIR Live, we're going to be bringing you this sort of content from people who've had experience in different residences, right? We're going to have the one-on-one convos, right, to start. But as with all things that are EIR led and created, we're going to co-create, and we're going to co-create with you, the listeners and our audience, right? We're going to learn from the audience and bring in some things that you want to see. Those one-on-one conversations might evolve over time to be a panel of EIRs, maybe at the request of people who are listening, or maybe people that we've just identified in the ecosystem that we think would have a good dialogue about this topic. We're certainly not going to do it every single day as a cadence, but we're not going to make you wait a whole 2 months either. Okay. So, we're going to try to find the appropriate cadence somewhere between, hey, not a month and not every week, but a cadence that's going to be appropriate to bring to the audience with great content that we think would add value to what you want to do and learn from and learn about. The people that, we hope can get value from this is current EIRs, people who want to get their first EIR role and want to know what is it like doing this day to day. I've met all sorts of people who want experience in doing this. The other thing that we love for you to do is to like it, right? Share, with people, participate in the conversation, recommend people that you like to see on the podcast. Please subscribe and share it. If you see value, if there's a clip of value that you found from the podcast, we would encourage you to share with people. The other thing is that let other, EIRs know in your network, there's other people in the world building right now, EIR-led companies that are happening right now, and people doing interesting things that we don't know about, right? We want to meet those people. We want to meet those entrepreneurs and residents that are out really building and operating in the wild and doing different things, and to learn how is it different from their resident standpoint versus others that we might bring on the show. We love for people to join the live discussion. There's a live LinkedIn group right now that you can go request to join, and we'd love for you to join. And we want to share opportunities there, value, things that's going to help people, and hopefully start to share opportunities, right, that other EIRs can start to look at and take advantage of. And hey, drop some questions. We want questions for, future shows, future episodes that probably wasn't addressed on the first few episodes, but you want to see it addressed on the other episodes. So I think those are the things that we are really, really, interested in engaging with our listeners. We don't want to just be another podcast. We want people to get tangible value, which is where that live piece really starts to kick in. And we're going to have some really, really, really fun conversations to really do this. So, and maybe we'll get into the fun conversation around future roles and things that we want to do as an EIR. And I almost want to ask Ilya that right now, that if he had a dream role, to be an EIR somewhere, where would it be?
Yeah, it's I won't dive into this too much because we're going to steal our own thunder here. But
that's right.
For me, I mean, the reason that I'm EIR at a company that's really excited and focused on climate tech is it gives me an opportunity to sort of, add another couple languages. And these languages are probably going to be critical in the scaling of climate tech if we're going to sort of be able to accomplish the audacious goals that the world has, and then also solve a lot of the problems with deferred maintenance and all these other things in infrastructure. And so in many ways, actually, I am in a pretty impactful role for me today.
That's right.
Generally, as I've been thinking about it more, I see it as kind of a two-way street, right? There's roles where I can bring a lot of value to as an individual, and then there is roles that can be very enriching for me, my capabilities, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
And so when I think about kind of that, and ever since we started talking about it in a real way, those are kind of the themes that I think about. But in many ways, I'm in a great place.
Absolutely.
And where it's a good combination of languages and skills and things that I possess, and a problem space vertical where I can also learn and grow from. And so
that's awesome.
Great question. And it's one of those things where I could probably come up with a couple other things too, because there's a lot of amazing organizations in the world. But I think those are kind of the two themes. And then generally, like today we've already talked about, it's funny because we could probably spend another hour talking about the overlap of backgrounds. Both of us, some data center background, both
Absolutely.
of us sports tech background.
There we go.
Completely like unrelated, right? And so you get a lot of muscle memory and sort of market norms and things like that. And also depending on what time it was, right? There's also kind of the period of time, what was going on in the broader world that's fun. we talked about building a community and sort of connecting EIRs together. I found in the past few years, sort of doing that more as opportunities presented themselves for me to connect people that definitely should talk. Lots of interesting things happen from that. And so I'm excited in kind of growing that. And ultimately there's just so much, kind of opportunity to learn from each other, connect the dots. And for me, one of my hopes is kind of bring some of the insights that have contributed to the world from tech, from healthcare, from kind of places that have been relatively innovative in the last couple decades out into the broader world. Because I think that's a pretty big opportunity, kind of a large lever to scale some of the change that we need. So those are the things I'm excited about. What are you excited about in the conversation that we wrap up here?
Man, I'm super excited about a lot of different things, and thanks for sharing. I think you're in a great place too. And I would also argue that there's a legal overlap to our background as well when you worked in the IP group at Cisco as well. And like you said, there's so many different types of patents, which, again, there's so much breadth when you're at EIR. I can get into utility patents, design patents, and so on and so forth. But what I'm super excited about to actually do in the podcast is honestly, I think people who want to connect and engage with actual technical content, that they can actually use about a subject that's not a lot is written about on a day-to-day. There's high-level articles. There's very few people that you get the privilege to see who's been a former EIR, and they spill everything that they've learned, all the roadblocks, all the war rules, the things that they've been battle tested on, right, in their different roles and their different residences. And I think I'm really excited about this because we're building the podcast that I was looking for when I became an entrepreneur in residence. I was looking for a place to go and find different EIRs who had done different things in different places that I could learn from. And I'm incredibly excited about, learning from the people that we're going to bring on the show. I'm incredibly excited about, contributing to that conversation. I'm excited about trying to create pathways for the roles that they want to manifest, as an entrepreneur resident in some other organization in the future that's outside of what they're doing today. And I'm excited to see the light bulb come on for people who want to go after their first entrepreneur residence role and want to take their first swing, and to know that it's going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it. And, to have the privilege to be a translator and be bilingual in these environments, to become fluent in another language, and to sort of sharpen up your pencils and to put more tools in your toolbox. Those are the things that I think people are going to get from the podcast. And those are the things that I'm really excited about.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, I could add, but it's not worth it. I think you got 99% of the things I'm excited about too. So I say we just leave it there. And excited
Absolutely.
to have folks join us in the future.
All right. Well, looking forward to people joining us in the future. And please share, subscribe, participate. We're looking forward to engaging with you. Thanks for joining us on EIR Live. We hope today's episode offered you valuable insights into the entrepreneurial journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and check out the description for more details. Do you have questions or suggestions? Please reach out to us. Connect with us on social media. We really value your input. Catch us next time for more inspiring stories and strategies. Keep pushing boundaries and making your mark on the world. I'm Terrance with my co-host Ilya and Tabakh, signing off. Let's keep building.